Would like to introduce our keynote speaker today, who is a friend of mine who has really taken up the challenge that Lyndon LaRouche gave all of us, which is to be a patriot of your nation, your homeland, but to be a citizen of the world and to act for the good of humanity. And what you find is that these things are not contradictory. He's translated the World Land Bridge Report into Arabic, co-authored the EIR report on the development of Africa and Southwest Asia, and has become very well known in Iraq as both a teacher of LaRouche's economics and an advocate for the World Silk Road. So I'd like to introduce now Hussein Askari.
Thank you, Diane, for this nice introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to keynote this panel, especially after the fantastic two panels which we saw yesterday. First of all, I would like to wish all of you a happy new year, a happy Nowruz. Yesterday, Saturday, we witnessed the vernal equinox as the sun positioned itself directly on the Earth's equator, shining equally on the north and south poles of our planet, and on every nation, declaring the arrival of the spring. Many nations in Asia celebrate this as the first day of the new year. All nations are equal in the eyes of the universe and the creator of the universe. Now, when we look at the world from space, and specifically at the confluence of the continents of Eurasia and Africa, we take note of a region which is falsely called the Middle East. So you have in the first slide, this map is something which the Schiller Institute and Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and their associates have developed of what we call the World Land Bridge. It's connecting all the continents and nations with development corridors. And we imposed on it the Belt and Road Initiative corridors, which were announced by the Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013. Now, the problem is that people are too much possessed by the idea of trade. The Silk Road is not simply for trade, it's a development corridor. And I hope all of you saw the wonderful clip of the speech made by Mr. Lyndon LaRouche many, many years ago about the idea of the development corridors. So when we talk about these and we draw these lines, these are development corridors, as we will come to discuss. Now, there is no such a place as the Middle East. East of what and in the middle of what? In the United Nations, or if you are a soccer enthusiast, you know that there is no FIFA football division called Middle East. Now, this Middle East is a creation, the term is a creation of the British East India Company, which coined the term to identify its colonies and properties as seen from London. So you have the Near East, the Middle East, and the Far East. That is far from London. We, the United Nations and FIFA, don't use British colonial terminology. We use scientific criteria for looking at distinguishable continents, landmass. So we have East Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, and our region, West Asia, not Middle East. For reasons of including Afghanistan and even Pakistan, we say Southwest Asia. The same thing applies to the term Indo-Pacific, which is a geopolitical concoction. There is no such a place as Indo-Pacific. And British geopolitics is making the Pacific, which means calm and peaceful, more and more troubled and warlike. Now, geopolitics have turned Southwest Asia into middle of hell. Look at the conditions in Libya and Iraq and the continuing crimes against humanity that are being committed against the people of Yemen and Syria by denying them food and medicine and by destroying their infrastructure. We should also not forget the plight of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza who are suffering under Israeli occupation and who don't know if they ever will have a state or a homeland. But our purpose here is not to seek retribution, but to seek justice for the victims of the endless wars. And we do that by building a beautiful future for the children today and for the coming generations. That's our definition of justice, honoring the victims by giving their offspring a prosperous and peaceful future. But work can and should start now, not in the future. So we go to Southwest Asia and its immediate neighborhood. We are looking at a region of almost 500 million people, mostly young people under the age of 23, relatively well educated. This is also the center of many ancient civilizations: Mesopotamia, Persia, Syria, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Yemen. It is the birthplace of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It also happens to have 2/3 of the known hydrocarbon reserves of the world. But most importantly, besides the young population in this crossroads of continents, that's the real wealth of these nations. The term crossroads of the continents was used by the late American statesman and economist and our teacher, Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, in a speech he gave in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, in May 2002. If we can have the next slide. In that speech, which was well attended by oil ministers and half of the cabinet of the United Arab Emirates, LaRouche identified 3 aspects of that are necessary for achieving peace and development in this region. These 3 are: 1, developing the water resources and combating desertification; 2, industrialization in the sense of using petroleum not as a cash-generating export commodity, but as an industrial feedstock for petrochemical and plastics production, increasing the added value and usefulness of each barrel of oil by orders of magnitude; and 3, instead of using oil and gas as fuel, LaRouche proposed that these nations build nuclear power, both to desalinate seawater and provide power to its industrial base. 5 years later, the government of Abu Dhabi launched its nuclear program and the construction of the largest nuclear power plant cluster in the region at Al Baraka site. The second of its 4 plants was just commissioned for operation last month. Each of the plants generate 1,250 megawatts of electricity and additional heat. But much more is needed in this region as well, as we will see. Now, LaRouche's initiative in this region did not start in 2002, but as early as 1975, when he visited Baghdad, my own birthplace, but I was 7 years old then, I didn't know LaRouche. At that time, he proposed the Oasis Plan for achieving peace between the Arab nations and Israel on the basis of economic development, not more political paperwork agreements. Again, in 1993, when the Oslo Agreement was signed between the Palestinians and Israelis, Mr. LaRouche said, "Get the shovels and bulldozers in the ground immediately and start building the economic infrastructure necessary for the people. Otherwise, extremists lurking in the background, like Ariel Sharon and others on the Palestinian side, would do their best to sabotage the peace process by provoking violent actions." Unfortunately, they succeeded because the US, Europe, and the Israelis got busy making real estate deals rather than developing the economy of the whole region, as Mr. LaRouche advised. By real estate deals, I mean long negotiations about which piece of land I get and which piece you get, etc., etc. Following 9/11 attacks in 2001, which, by the way, Mr. LaRouche warned it in advance could happen, to launch a police state in the United States and globally, the US and NATO went on a rampage in this region, starting with Afghanistan. Iraq followed in 2003, and then we had the so-called Arab Spring, which was used as a springboard for invading more nations, like Libya and Syria in 2011, and launching the war in Yemen in March 2015. By the way, this week is the anniversaries of the invasion of Iraq, the war on Syria, and the war on Yemen, all started in March. While campaigning to stop these destructive wars, Mr. LaRouche and our association presented alternative policies for the US, the EU, and these nations based on the understanding of the realities of this region, our knowledge of physical economics, and the importance of this region for the world. As you may know, Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche and our association were developing since the early 1990s the concept of the transcontinental development corridors, or land bridges, as I mentioned earlier, which evolved into the Eurasian-African land bridge, as also popularly known as the New Silk Road. The Chinese government early on realized this that this is the right future strategy. And by 2013, President Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which now has become endorsed by more than 136 nations and more organizations, and has already transformed the world economy despite massive opposition by the US and some of its allies. So we started matching LaRouche's physical economics concepts with the Belt and Road Initiative as a strategy for reconstruction in this region, this war-torn region, and for lasting peace. In 2014, we developed Operation Phoenix for the reconstruction of Syria and connecting to the new Silk Road. My colleague Ulf Sandmark took the personal risk of traveling to Syria in the middle of the hot phase of the war in late 2015 and in later years to present this plan to the Syrian leadership. It was in that context that we met with our last session speaker, Her Excellency Dr. Buthayna Shaban, political and media advisor to the Syrian presidency. Operation Phoenix, as we see in the map, this is part of a map which we picked from a documentary we did on Aleppo and the reconstruction of Syria. The rebuilding of Syrian cities within the context of connecting it to the new Silk Road by land and sea, and realizing the strategy of the 5 Cs, which was proposed by President Bashar al-Assad before the war. As you can see, the region is surrounded by 5 Cs. Syria before the war was self-sufficient in food supplies, medicine, and many other important products, but most of that has been destroyed by the war. Another important aspect of Operation Phoenix is our proposal for the establishment of a National Reconstruction and Development Bank, or fund. Ironically, the model we used is the idea of creation of national credit as developed by Alexander Hamilton, the United States' first Treasury Secretary and one of the founding fathers of the American Republic. A sovereign nation must have the capability to autonomously issue credit for internal improvements. At the same time, it can reach agreements with other sovereign nations for long-term, low interest rates credits for imports of technologies and know-how from these same nations. This was, for example, the way the US assisted Germany in the post-World War II reconstruction period. We move now to Yemen. In 2015, the war against Yemen was waged by the so-called Saudi coalition. What is happening in Yemen is not a civil war, but a foreign invasion backed by the United States and Britain. But even in the darkest moments of this war, we had Yemenis, especially youth, reaching out to the LaRouche Movement for support against the war, but also for ideas to organize the people around a concept for peace and development. They are called the BRICS Youth Parliament. They started teaching LaRouche's economics ideas in their circles. You see in this emblem, there are 5 figures in the center of it, which they call LaRouche's 5 keys of development. Actually, we don't have time to go through it now. They also worked together with the Yemeni Investment Authority and us. We put together a plan for the reconstruction of Yemen and connecting it to the Belt and Road. We called it Operation Felix, the happy miracle of the reconstruction of Yemen. Yemen, for the ancient Greeks and Romans, they were calling it Arabia Felix, which means because it was its people were the most prosperous and happy people. We applied the concept of the development corridor as developed by Lyndon LaRouche, which I mentioned earlier, to the demographic, climatic, and natural resources distribution in Yemen. Then we matched that with the Belt and Road Initiative to make Yemen and South Arabian Rim a bridge between Asia and Africa. The development of Yemen's ports is also part of the Maritime Silk Road strategy. Operation Felix was endorsed by the Yemeni Investment Authority officially in a special event convened in its headquarters in June 2018. And our friend in this image, Fuad al-Ghafari, he presented the plan there because I wasn't able to be in Yemen at the time. So whenever peace is reached in Yemen, the reconstruction of the country can hit the ground running, since a complete plan is already available. Here too, we proposed the establishment of a national reconstruction and development bank for Yemen. And I think our guest speakers from Yemen, His Excellency Engineer Hisham Sharaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs, will address this issue in his statement next in this conference. Now we go further to Iraq. In 2020, I was pulled by a group of Iraqi young people into a heated debate in Iraq about two issues. First, the government delaying of the building of a strategic great port of Fao in the southern city of Basra in the Gulf, on the Gulf. And two, the blocking by the same government of a very important cooperation agreement with China called Framework of Cooperation on Export and Credits, popularly known in Iraq as the China-Iraq Oil for Reconstruction Agreement. This was a very important credit arrangement reached in May 2018 between the Iraqi Finance Ministry and the Chinese Export and Credit Insurance Corporation, Sinosure, to create a special fund where oil revenues from a fraction of Chinese purchases of Iraqi oil are accumulated monthly. These would be matched by a ratio of 1 to 6 by Chinese bank loans. The $10 billion fund will then be used to generate loans for infrastructure projects in Iraq to be built by Chinese companies. These projects include ports, airports, road, railways, power projects, housing, hospitals, water, and sewage systems. It means a complete overhaul and reconstruction of the Iraqi infrastructure, which has been destroyed by the wars launched by the US and Britain since 1991. The neglect of this infrastructure under the US-British-controlled government since the invasion of 2003 has left Iraq, one of the wealthiest countries in the 1970s and 80s, with a daily electricity supply, for example, of only 4 to 5 hours a day for households and businesses after 17 years. The same goes for water, healthcare, education, and other services. But this agreement with China was not activated immediately when Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi finally activated it in October 2019. Then he suddenly faced a color revolution, which had originally started as legitimate protests against the lack of services and the rampant corruption. But it was hijacked by forces that turned it into a violent revolt. When the United States assassinated Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani and the leader of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces in Baghdad on January 3, 2020, more chaos ensued, and that was the final nail in the coffin of Adel Abdul Mahdi's government, which was forced to resign, as consequently the paralyzing of the China-Iraq agreement. Just one thing to say about Qasem Soleimani and this Iraqi Shia militia leader. These were not fighting the United States. These were busy fighting ISIS, the Islamic State, side by side with the United States. So in any case, the new government, which came as a compromised temporary substitute, suspended the agreement and used the funds for reconstruction to solve government budget problems. I'm not going to say more about the agreement itself because our guest from the Iraqi parliament would like to say something about it today. I have written extensively about it in our publication, Executive Intelligence Review. It was in this context that a youth movement emerged in late 2020, demanding the activation of the agreement. I used my knowledge of LaRouche's physical economics, previous reconstruction studies, and our historical development of the new Silk Road concept to give classes to those youth through social media. These groups started to grow in numbers, and gradually the Iraqi opposition media took note of this. Even members of parliament became aware of this movement and its demands. If we look at Iraq in the context of the Belt and Road, we can see that it can be a real bridge between for both the maritime and land-based Silk Roads, and utilize its pivotal geographic location in addition to its human and natural resources. If the infrastructure is developed, that would be possible. That development will be possible. In addition, Iraq will be able to rebuild its industrial and agricultural production capacity to free itself from the current total reliance on oil revenues. Iraq sells oil and imports 97% of all its needs. Oil fluctuations have had devastating impact on Iraq economically and socially in recent years. Besides, Iraq can be a large petrochemicals industry using its own oil. I would like to show you some of the activities of these young people and the forces they have mobilized in Iraq. We have a few pictures, so you can see they spontaneously have been organizing small demonstrations. They write posters. This is a picture of in Basra in Iraq in front of the statue of the Iraqi poet Badr Shakr Sayyab, a symbol in Iraq, and also on the highways. Now I didn't do any of that. These people themselves made these posters and they are posting them everywhere they can reach. I don't know if we have the other slides quickly. These are some of the things they have produced and, putting them on. These are Iraqi tribes in Nasiriyah who were mobilized also to, their signs say, we want to activate the China agreement and work with China on the new Silk Road. So these pictures, some of them I got personally, but also they are posted on Facebook page. I would like to stop at this picture. I mean, you take a look at these young people. They are probably somewhere between 14 and 17 years of age. These are from a city in southern Iraq where the living conditions are the worst in the country. What are they asking for is in these posters is that they say we want to activate the Iraq-China agreement, we want to join the Belt and Road, and also we want to build the FAO project. Now, these kids can become engineers, scientists, or construction workers if we start the reconstruction process. Otherwise, they might potentially be recruited to some militia or extremist group. These are the choices they are facing, and you can see what their preferences are, what they want to have, what kind of future they want to have. These are the issues we should be discussing. What kind of choice we want to give them and other youth around the world, which this conference is dedicated to. Many major political forces and parties in Iraq, especially in the south, are now publicly calling for the activation of the China agreement and joining the new Silk Road. Some of them do that out of opportunism, since the October elections are approaching. But what this shows is that that there is a groundswell in the population around this question. In conclusion, I would just say to especially policymakers in the United States, Britain, and other NATO countries, that it is never too late to mend your ways and do the right thing. Therefore, it is the right time that this region, which has been a cockpit of global geopolitics, can suddenly become a place where the major powers, the US, Russia, and China, could work together. One more thing, the people of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, and Yemen are not out to get retribution or vengeance for what was done to them. They are asking for peace and for having the right for a decent living standard. But believe me, they will keep fighting the invaders of their countries to the last man, which is really unnecessary. If you think you can starve them into submission and force them to give up their sovereignty, independence, and their dignity, you are mistaken. You have not learned anything, and you know nothing about history. But if you do, as Mr. LaRouche repeatedly said, pull out the bombers, drones, and tanks, and bring in the tractors, technology, and engineers, then the people of Southwest Asia will welcome you with open arms. That is what justice means for me and for them. Thank you very much.